Hi, I'm going to give a brief demonstration tonight, first of all, on how to add a program to the EV3RSTORM project so that you can set the volume in two ways. The first way you're going to see is that you move your hand closer and farther away from the infrared sensor, and then you push on the touch sensor to lock in the sound volume that you like. And the second part of the demo is going to be how to set or how to program the EV3RSTORM so that you can set the sound volume with the infrared or the infrared beacon, which is basically the remote. I'm going to show you a video first, and then I'm going to go straight in and show you how to create the program. So let's just watch the video together, and then I'm going to start. I'll jump in again at the end of the video, and we'll run Lego Mindstorm Home Edition, and I'll show you how to program the first volume setting capability, and that will be using your hand and the proximity detection on the infrared sensor. So let's watch the video together. This is the demo on how to set the sound level in two different ways. Hi everyone, I'm going to give a brief demonstration today on how to set the sound level on the EV3RSTORM using both a technique using the IR sensor and a proximity setting by using your hand to move closer and further away from the robot, thereby making the sound higher and lower in volume. And I'll also demonstrate using the infrared beacon. I'll try and do this quick so the video isn't too boring, but what I'm going to do is start the first program. Now the first program is going to show how to set the sensor by using your hand, how to set the volume by using your hand and the infrared sensor here, and by moving my hand backwards and forwards the volume is going to go up and down. And when I get to the volume to a setting that I like, then I'm going to push the touch sensor, and that will lock in the sound at that volume level, and you'll hear the robot do a little confirmation that the sound volume has been set. So let me just start the program.
Set the sound level for the robot.
And as you can see, there's a certain tone, and that's set right now at the volume level of 50. And you'll see as I put my hand towards the sensor, it's going to the volume will decrease. To go nothing, and then back it away. So if that's a volume that you like, then you just push the touch sensor.
Volume test. Volume test.
And now the setting is set. The volume is set. So I'm going to just quickly show that again. Start the program.
Set the sound level for the robot.
Move your hand. And when your hand is in a position that you like the sound to be,
Volume test. Volume test.
push the button. Okay, now the other program that I have on here is with the beacon, or the infrared remote.
Set the sound level for the robot.
Now what this does is, this, using the up and down, I'll show you here, using the up and down on the infrared sensor, push up, the robot says up, and the volume goes up in increments of 10. So, and then push down.
Down, 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 down.
You can hear the volume decreasing. And now there's no volume at all. Now go back up. And again, just like the other mode, when you want to set the volume, you just push the button.
Volume test. Volume test.
Okay, so that's one. Now let me show you how it's set lower.
Set the sound level for the robot.
Okay, it starts off as a default of 50, 40, 30, 20.
Volume test. Volume test.
There you go. So that's a quick way on how you can control the volume settings on your robot in a couple of different ways. And again, this demo, I have a program that I'll show you on how to do both of these settings so that you can set the sound volume on your robot, so that when it then starts to operate, it's not working too loudly or too low, And it's just a way to learn some programming techniques. Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye. Okay, so that's the video. Now what I'm going to do is show you how to program the first part of that, which was the using the infrared sensor and using your hand. So I've just launched the LEGO Mindstorm Home Edition. If you've been watching some of my other lessons, all I've basically been doing is taking the EV3RSTORM project and I've been enhancing it with programs. So if I go over here and open, I'm going to open my JJ EV3RSTORM project, which is the one I've basically been working on. And what I'm going to do is show you a couple of things that need to be set up before you can actually program. And I'm not going to bore you with too much of the detail, but I'm going to show you how to create the program, but you're going to have to do a couple of things on your own. And I did have previous lessons, and I'll get into that in a second on how to do that. Okay, so close this little annoying pop-up by clicking on that content editor button. And what I'm going to do is, this is the IR with Shoot program that we did in a previous lesson. This one has two consecutive programs running at the same, obviously at the same time. And this is the original IR. I think it's called IR control, which controls the EV3RSTORM moving around. And then this is the kind of customization that I've included. And what that does is that reacts on channel 2 to allow it to shoot either up or down. Because in the original EV3RSTORM, you can't actually move around and shoot at the same time without, I think you have to push one of the buttons. But, sorry, the touch sensor. But in this case, I've just added another program that lets you switch channels, and you can find that on a previous lesson. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close that because we don't need that one. So, and what I'm going to do now is create a new program. And we're going to call this set sound IR vol. Set sound vol IR. So basically set the sound level with volume. Set the sound volume with the infrared sensor, because I'm going to create another program later on that's going to be with the beacon. So it's going to be volume with the beacon. You can see that in my next lesson probably. I'm just gonna save this, and I'm going to use the menu all the time so that you can see what I'm doing. So I saved that project. Now what I want to do is go, before I can start programming anything in here or adding blocks, I'm going to go back to the properties, and I'm going to show you a couple of things that you're going to have to do before we start. Before you start, we are going to have to create two sound files. Now, I just want to explain, this up and this down is what you heard in the robot. When the volume is going up, he says up. When it's going down, he says down. Those two sound files are actually built into LEGO, and you don't need to create those yourself unless you want to customize your own voice. Then you can create them. But the two sound files that you're going to need, and you'll see this in the program, as I start showing you, is one called volume test, and that's a sound file that just basically says volume test, and that's going to be the sound that the robot says once you've set the volume at your preferred level. And then the set sound level sound file, that's going to be the prompting command to have you set the sound level once you run the program. Now, again, there's a previous lesson where I show how to create these sound files, so go ahead and create those if you have to, and then come back and follow. If you've already created them, then let's just get to the next thing. The next thing we're going to have to do is, I'm going to show you how to do that now, but you'll see how it's used in the program later. Now, we're going to create a variable. Now, the variable that we want to create, so in order to create a variable, just click on the add button. We're going to add a variable, and it's called volume, okay? Now, variables are obviously things that you can store information into, and so that you can retrieve that information later. Now, our volume, I'm clicking on the drop down here, is going to be a numeric value, okay? So click on OK, and now that's saved. And we'll be able to see later on how we can use that. So without further ado, let's go into starting the program. So as you saw in the demo, and you can go back and forth, and I'm going to try and go from memory, but I'm pretty sure I know how it works. The first thing that we want to do is when the program starts, is that we want the robot to prompt the operator to set the sound level. So we're just going to go down here, and we're going to grab a sound block. Grab the sound block, drag it up here, and place it right beside these. Snap automatically. I'm sure, hopefully you've programmed in the past. Anyways, if not, I'll just I don't want to insult your intelligence, but I will walk us through this pretty much in fine detail. And I just want to give some pointers where I can. So there's a sound block here. Now, part of the sound block is you can play a file. We're not going to worry about that right now. You can set this is actually the sound volume. So what's going to happen is I'm going to allow this robot to default to 100. So when the volume comes on, when the robot is started, he'll come on, he'll be very loud. Now, this flag here will set in a second. But what we want to do is, with this flag, this is actually determines whether or not you wait for the sound file to complete playing, or if you just play it once, and then if it plays once, it will actually continue the next step. Or two, you want the sound to repeat throughout the whole process that the program is running. What we want to do is we want to wait for the completion. So we're just going to allow this sound file to complete. And in order to pick the file name, so if down here, down here on the left in this folder, you can this stop is actually, it will stop the sound file that's been running continuously. You can play a tone, or you can play a note. We're going to be playing a file. You can fool around with a little bit with yourself, but tones and notes, we'll actually see a little bit of the play a tone later. So what I'm going to do is click on here, and what that does is that allows you to select the sound file. Now, as you can see, I've already kind of fooled around a little bit, so the up and down project sounds are already here. Now, in order to find those, you can go to the Lego sound files, and you can go around through here until you find up and down. I can't remember exactly where they are, but because I've used these sounds already previously, they show up in my project list, okay? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the set sound level, and you're going to hear it play.
Set the sound level for the robot.
So what that is that's the first block. We've got the first block. It's going to prompt the person to set the sound level of the robot, okay? Now, the next thing that we want to do is we want to introduce our variable. Now, the reason that we're going to introduce a variable is because we have to initialize it. So if I go down here and grab my variable block and drag it up here, you can see that it's already defaulted with volume. Now, the Lego did a good job here. They know if I've only got one variable name, it defaults to volume. So that's the only one I have. Now, I'm not sure if I have more than one variable, if it will default at all, or if it makes you select from a list, but that's something you can try on your own. So now what we want to do is we want to make sure that this variable is set to the right mode, okay? Now, what we want to do is, now the modes are, you can either read or write. And we already know that this is a numeric variable, so I'm not really sure why they show all these other options, but we're always going to stick to numeric because volume is a numeric variable. So again, we want to leave it at write, because what we want to do is we want to write a value here into the variable volume. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the default level of the variable volume to be 50. Basically what that means is when we start up our program, that you'll see, as you remember in the demo, what happens in this one is it makes a continuous tone, and then as you move your hand closer and further away from the robot, the sound goes down as you go closer, and then it goes up as you go further. So what we're going to do is we're going to start at a setting of 50. Now, the next thing that we want to introduce is we want to introduce a loop. Now, this loop is something that's going to play continuously, and what we want within that loop is to play that tone that you heard, because that's what's going to happen is the tone's going to play over and over and over again until you hit the touch sensor, and I'll show you how to program that. So go down to the bottom and grab the loop block, drop the loop block up, and let it snap, okay? Now, we want to interrupt this loop, so I'm going to go right ahead and introduce the loop interrupt, which is, oh, wait a second, let me just explain. Otherwise, this would run for infinity, okay? This would run for infinity and execute everything within this loop until you turn your robot off or stop the program. Okay, but what we want to do is we want to stop it when the touch sensor's state changes, okay? Now, the thing about the EV3RSTORM is that the touch sensor is on port 1, so that's fine. And what we want to do is we can set this state change to be either 0, which means when it's released. So in other words, when you push down on the touch sensor,
it will read 0 when you lift up your finger off the touch sensor. Number 1 is pressed. So when you push down on the touch sensor, immediately the state will change to 1. And this loop will actually stop if I would have selected 1. Now, what we want to do is we're just going to go ahead and pick number 2, which is just when it's bumped. So you're just going to tap it, and that has to be so pushed in and pushed out at the same time. It's just basically tapping it. 2 and 1 are kind of similar. 2 kind of comes in handy when you want the robot to do something when it touches something lightly, like a wall, and you want it to do something and turn around, because if you hit a wall, you can't do release because it's going to be stuck on the wall. But you can do pressed, but bumped is usually a little bit easier to use. So we're going to set the touch sensor. It's going to compare the state. So what's going to happen is we're going to loop and do these actions that I'll be putting in here until the touch sensor is bumped. Okay. Now the first thing that we want to do within the loop is that we want to read our infrared sensor. Okay. So I'm going to grab the infrared sensor block and I'm going to drag it up here. Now, I'm not going to bore you too much with all of the different things that's going on in the sensor, but there's a proximity setting here. So it will measure the beacon, and we will use that later on for an IR when you want to use your beacon as a remote control. You pick remote, but the beacon is basically it'll try and find the beacon, and that's why I'm using both the terms beacon and remote for that little device that comes with it, because in one mode, when you turn it on and by pushing the power button, it goes on what's called beacon mode, where it's sending a continuous IR signal, which the infrared sensor can then try and detect and find and track and stuff like that. Or you can be set to remote mode, where you're actually pushing buttons on the beacon itself, and it's sending signals to the infrared sensor. But I'm not going to go into too much of that. We will learn a little bit of that later. What we want to do is read how close the person's hand is to the sensor. And so I've selected proximity. Now, the good thing about the proximity measure is that the measure of proximity is between 0 and 100. So, and actually that is what the volume setting also can hold, 0 to 100. So the good thing is I guess you probably see where I'm going with this. As I measure my distance of my hand to the infrared sensor, it's going to vary between 0 and 100. Now, the one thing that I want to point out here is that it's just a proximity. It's got nothing to do with how many centimeters or inches your hand is away. It's just a number from 0 to 100 that represents how close you are. I believe if you want to measure the distance that an object is away from a robot, you have to actually get the ultrasonic sensor, and that does measurements of distance. The infrared sensor simply determines proximity in a range of 0 to 100. So now we've got our sensor reading. Now there's a little bit of a catch here, is that we want this sensor reading to go somewhere. And where we want the sensor reading to go is into our variable. So what we're going to do is grab our variable and put our variable back up here. And we're actually going to keep this to the right mode. And you see it default to the volume again. But right now the volume, that setting is 0. Now this is something that I want you guys to learn, is that if I want to write a value into a variable, you use a drag and drop technique. So what I do is as I hover over this writable kind of component within this block, I hold the left mouse button down, and you'll see that I can drag over and drop onto the volume. And this is the right. So what I'm doing is I'm writing the variable. I'm writing the number of the value between 0 and 100 of the proximity, and I'm writing that into the volume variable. So now what will happen is the volume variable will vary between 0 and 100 based on how close you are, how close your hand is to the infrared sensor. Now the next thing that we want to do is, as this is looping and the person is moving their hand to and from and away from the infrared sensor, we want a tone to be played that will kind of indicate to you how high the volume is. So we go back down to the bottom, and we pick another sound block. Okay, now drop the sound block there. Now the trick is here, what we want to do this time is we're just going to play a tone. Okay, it's just going to be a beep, 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 So, and what we'll do is we'll just pick the default. Okay, so there's the default, that's the frequency in hertz. I'm actually not really sure. I think I'm not really sure what tone this is, but I think it's A, 440. Anyways, and then this is the duration of the tone. We'll leave it at a second. That's fine. And then the volume. We'll get back to that in a second. And then here, the play type. So the play type again, we could wait for completion. We could play once, or we could repeat. We're going to select wait for completion again. So what's going to happen is as I loop, I'm going to put my hand in front of the sensor. It's going to be playing a tone, and it's going to loop until I push the touch sensor. Now, there's a catch here. I want to show you something. What I want to do is I want to play the tone at the same volume that the volume variable has been set to, meaning that I want what I'm going to do now is left click again on this value that's coming out of the sensor, and I'm going to drop that into the volume. So now what you'll see is as the person moves their hand from and to the proximity, as the person moves their hand closer and further away from the infrared sensor, it will translate the variable or translate that number and save it in the volume variable. But at the same time, with the same number, it's going to play the volume of the tone at that level so that you can hear what your volume setting is going to be. And there's one last thing that we want to do within this loop. We just want to make sure that we've got the proper port set. So that's one thing I always check. And I believe that the EV3RSTORM does have port 4 set for the infrared sensor, and it does have port 1 set for the touch sensor. This can be quite a nightmare for you when you create your own programs and nothing's working. Always check your port numbers. As you can see here, it doesn't really matter what sound. Check your port numbers and check the variables that you're using. The other thing you might want to quickly check is to make sure that you've got your variables in the right state. Again, this is writing because I've defaulted to 50. This is writing and writing. Sorry, this is writing because I'm copying the proximity value into the variable volume, the volume variable. The next thing that I want to do is I want to do something when the loop terminates, right? So when the loop terminates, I want to play a sound that will indicate or play kind of a phrase that will indicate to the user what the volume's been set to. So what I'm going to do is pick another sound file, but there's a little bit of a problem. I want the sound to be set at the volume variable. Now the trick here is that you're not really allowed to pull the values out of a loop. So what you have to do is you have to put another volume variable here, and there's a little bit of a trick here that we're going to learn is that I don't want to write my volume variable. I want to read my volume variable. And what that allows me to do now is click and drag and drop it onto my volume setting. And now what you've got is you've got a program that will prompt the user to set the sound level. Then it will default the variable to 50. And then within the loop, it will loop and read the proximity of somebody's hand or another object to the infrared sensor, setting the volume variable as you move your hand further and closer, and it will play a tone that represents the level at which you've got the volume set. It will wait until you tap the touch sensor, and then upon completion of this loop, when it pops out, the first thing it's going to do is it's going to read the volume into a sound file, and the file that we want it to say is
volume test, volume test.
Volume test. So what will happen is it will pop out, and the volume of the sound file volume test will be at the level that the volume variable is set at. Now, I'll show you a little bit later on in the future, but what you can do now is you can use this. So usually what I do is I'm going to show you in the future how to do this, but you can create this into a block now. And what that means is I usually execute this program at the beginning of any other program that I have it doing. And what I do is, the reason I do that is because I've kind of found that sometimes it's annoying how loud the robot is. So it is kind of fun to fool around with the volume settings. And I'll have a future lesson on how to create a block. But that's basically the end of the lesson. You've seen the demo already, so now you know how to create the program. And good luck, and I hope you enjoyed.